start the meeting. I'm going to do a call to order. To my left. Name.
Sloan Moultrie. Tim Pritchard.
Jenny Sisson.
Kyle Ackland.
And no one's online, correct? So we have a determination of quorum and
For the utility rate board.
for the utility rate board, correct?
Joint session.
Yeah, Donnie's going on that fire run, I'm sure, and then somebody else was, I think, Jerry was gonna, no, it was, Mike was gonna zoom in, Jerry wasn't gonna be here.
There won't be a quorum for that board.
Yeah.
Okay.
They can certainly listen in, we can proceed. And Madam Chair, we do a little bit of housekeeping. We do need to elect, we have a vice president, we also need to elect a secretary. Strictly follow the ordinance and sign a resolution we're going to consider tonight.
Okay. Do we have any nominations for a secretary?
I nominate Sloan.
Second.
So,
Fantastic.
so we have nominated Sloan. We need a vote then.
Yes.
So all in favor for Sloan as the secretary, say aye.
Aye.
So that's
Congratulations.
all ayes. You get to do some signing. All right, now we'll move forward here. And we do have a quorum for one board, the utility board, rate board, and then not the other. Item number 3, approval of previous minutes. If everyone could look at the utility rate advisory, and on hold will be the Waterworks. And
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
we have a mo-
Second.
we have a second. All those in favor for approval of the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, those minutes are approved. Any old business? These listed. New business, we have the water rate study, which is in your folders if you don't have a copy of that. And I will open the floor then to Mr. Rusky.
Okay, with that, I just pass on to either Buzz or Brandon to walk us through the study.
Yeah, thank you. We're probably going to tag team just a little bit here, but just as a way of introduction, we're with O.W. Cronin Associates. We've been working on both the water and the electric rate studies, but the water was a little bit more of a priority with for a number of reasons, but we'll probably want to try to follow up with Marissa and Scott next week, maybe to give you a little bit of a more detailed update on where we are with the electric. We've made a lot of progress there, but we've got a few loose ends to tie up, I guess, with we need to get some more information from Tracy on the industrial power customer usage data, which we're going to probably follow up with her tomorrow on some of that, but we pretty much have our baseline.
Just so you know, she is here right now, so.
Okay, hey Tracy, how are you?
How are you?
So she
Good,
got
good.
heads up.
We're gonna pester you a little bit more tomorrow. I know we've been pushing you on the water stuff, but we need to get those demand readings on the large power users, and then maybe look at some of the other ones that are over 50,000 kilowatt hours a month. But you'll be getting a call from either Brandon and Michelle or just Michelle Davis tomorrow about getting some of that information. But and then hopefully we'll, as soon as we get this water situation nailed down, we can follow that right up with the electric rates as well. But hang on just one second. I gotta close the door.
Well, while he's doing that, I'll go ahead and share my screen where I've got a PowerPoint.
You share the screen. There we
Yeah.
go. All righty. Can everybody see that okay?
Yeah, it's great.
You know, why don't we jump right into the next slide, Brandon? And the current water rates have not been amended other than for the state gross income tax repeal last year since 2004. So it's really been almost 20 years since the test year for that old rate study. So you're almost 20 years into these rates being in place without increasing, which is sort of amazing. You know, if you just compounded 19 years of inflation at 3%, you know, that would suggest 75% increase in costs. So you've done a remarkable job of living with the same rates for an incredibly long period of time. User base growth has helped sustain, you know, this relatively stagnant rate structure that you've been able to live with. But the water utility rates have also been subsidized by the general fund and TIF, your tax increment financing revenues. So the idea here is to get away from those subsidies. The utilities should stand on their own 2 feet. And I think at our last meeting, that was echoed by Jenny from Jenny, are you there tonight?
I'm here.
Okay, good. I think that was a point that she made at our initial meeting with the council a couple of weeks ago. So the town is sort of at a point where, you know, it's becoming important to eliminate these cost subsidies for a number of reasons. One of which, the TIF program has a limited life. It doesn't go on forever. They all will sunset at a certain point in time. And the town general fund resources are also limited. Department of Local Government Finance controls the amount of property tax levy that you're able to collect each year. And of course, those are subject to circuit breaker losses and so forth. And the county tax board controls any local income taxes. So there's very little control that the town really has in generating funds for the general fund, police, fire, parks, etc. So the idea here is to get the utilities all standing on their own 2 feet. And I think you've been going through sort of a transition and realignment of those costs by each municipal department. And we understood that 2022 was really the first really representative year that we had in terms of those cost realignments. So that's the base year that we're using for our study is 2022. There's a couple other issues that we're proposing within this rate proposal. One is shifting public fire protection capacity fees, or hydrant charges, they're often referred to from away from being supported by the general fund property tax, and have a separate retail user fee or monthly fee that every connection would contribute to towards that cost, and eliminate that from having to be part of the general fund requirements. And this is not an uncommon change. I would probably have to say, and maybe Jenny, you could comment on this, but most Indiana communities have already made this change pursuant to rules established back in the 1980s, when the Indianapolis Water Company would have to go in for rate adjustments, and the city of Indianapolis couldn't afford to pay the hydrant rental. They call it hydrant rental charges, but it's really the cost of building in the capacity in your storage towers and distribution systems to provide fire flow capability. So everybody calls it a hydrant charge, but the cost of the hydrant is probably the least significant part of coming up with, the actual cost of building that capacity into the distribution system. But again, there's also a subsidy from TIF for the existing Waterworks revenue bonds. So eventually that may be a consideration down the road to consider phasing out that TIF subsidy. We did look at that, but that would require, a little bit more of an impact at this point in time than, but certainly future water bonds, we would want to not necessarily have those subsidies go on indefinitely. But any rate, so let's go to the next slide. The municipal water rate making formula is set forth in Indiana Code 8-1.5-3-8. I'm not a real scholar of the Indiana Code, but we use this code all the time, so I'm not trying to over impress you with my prowess for the Indiana Code recitation, but at any rate, it establishes the statutory revenue requirements for municipal utilities and specifically the municipal water utility. And in that statute, the way it's worded, the statute is worded that the water rates shall be sufficient to cover these basic revenue requirements. And when it says shall be, that's a lot more strong language than might or maybe or could. The statute actually says that the rates shall be sufficient to cover the cash operation and maintenance expenses, debt service on bonds and other indebtedness, debt service reserves and working capital, depreciation and or an allowance for replacements and improvements. These are the primary statutory revenue requirements that municipal water rates shall be sufficient to cover. Additional provisions could include payments in lieu of property taxes, which is a means of compensating the general fund for the property taxes that the town would have received had the utility been privately owned. That's a May revenue requirement, and then return on plant. That's another May revenue requirement that we are not considering really at this point in time. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about rate of
Hey,
return.
Buzz,
Yeah,
you're gonna have to help me out. What's return on plant?
return on plant is where the utility would be allowed to have a reasonable return on its investment in its utility plant and service. And generally, when a utility, it's probably more of a prevalent thing for electric utilities that don't have much debt, if any. And in your water utility, you do have a fair, you have debt even though it's being subsidized right now. But it would be an additional component to your rate making formula that could generate additional funds. I think
Okay.
here,
Without getting too nerdy real quick, how is that? Is that like we assume the investment on a CD is 4%, return on plant would be 4%? I mean, is it that simple?
well, it's simpler for you in that you're not a regulated utility at the IURC. They have pretty stringent formulas that utilities must follow that really sort of preclude that from being reasonable if there's a lot of debt.
So what's the logic we could use?
Well, what we would do, we would look at your net utility plant investment. We would back out any debt. We would back out contributed capital, which you have, when developers put in the water lines in a subdivision, that would be a contributed capital or contributions in aid of construction.
So it would be only return on investment through the general fund?
Well, that investment of the utility, and if the town had paid for certain things, yes, that could be considered something eligible to earn a return on plant.
All right, well,
But
so
the
just,
plant that's given,
yeah,
like the home additions, they pay for it, but then that is taken out of the formula.
okay, well, I'd like to go into detail with you after or
Sure, yeah.
tonight, but,
Why don't we talk,
Okay.
it might be more relevant with the electric utility.
okay, all right.
So why don't we do that maybe next Thursday or Friday, if that works. We could come out to visit with you and Marissa again and
Okay,
talk about some of these other things. But
okay,
for now, to keep this rolling, I'm going to let Brandon sort of take over and go through the process we've gone through here. And I may jump in from time to time just to keep Brandon on his toes, but
Thanks, Buzz. So, yeah, like you said, my name is Brandon Barthel. So I've been a consultant with Buzz for a few years now. I've done a lot of work on water and sewer rate studies specifically. So just wanted to walk through the report with everyone, and what I'm showing here is your kind of the three major categories of what we looked at and kind of how we get from point A to point B, point being your final rates that we're proposing here in the rate study. So first, we start off with your historical financial statements. So we put together a balance sheet and an income statement where we look at your cash and your water funds. And then we look at 3 years, 2020, 21, and 2022. So we look what happened in those years. And we're using 2022, like Buzz mentioned, as your test year. So that's kind of the most important baseline for our future projections. After that, we go into your supplementary information. So these are a few other schedules that overall give us a better understanding of the utility. And then lastly, the pro forma financial information, which to you all is really the most important part of this, is essentially the results of the rate study and what we're showing here in option 1 and option 2. So option 1 is what is on the rate ordinance that was introduced last week or a couple weeks ago, whenever that was. And then tomorrow would be the public hearing on those rates, or option 1. So option 2, which we looked at, was if the water utility was to take on that principal and interest payment that is currently being subsidized by the TIF. So that would be the difference between those two. But so let's start here and go on to page 2 of the report. So if we're looking at your balance sheet, we've got your utility plant and service. So this would be the historical cost of the water plant. So we're valuing that at about 6.1 million. And then we look at below that, your cash and investments. So these are all your water funds. And as of the end of 2022, you had about 2.4 million in those funds. And then below that, here you have your long-term debt. So that would be those 2015 bonds that are currently being paid out of TIF revenues. So that's
one thing to emphasize, if I can just butt in here, Brandon, is
Yep.
that most of your funds are in that capital improvement fund category, where you've received funds from developer fees and so forth. Your operating funds are really pretty nominal. Your debt reserve fund is money that you can't really use until the bonds are paid off. You've got 2.7 million in bonds. The annual payment on that's about, I believe it's around that $400,000 reserve balance. And those have been paid for from your tax increment financing revenue. So that's a subsidy that, we may be looking to eliminate in the future. But I just wanted to point out that the funds from operations are actually fairly thin. Go ahead, Brandon. I'm sorry.
Well, and through our analysis too, some of that capital improvement funds does come from those fees that you mentioned, but also it looks like there's being transfers from the operating fund into that capital improvement fund, which generally is a good practice. Most utilities don't do that. Usually I'm in a situation here where they don't have anything in their operating fund, and they don't have anything in their depreciation fund either. So, that's kind of the story there. But if we go on to page 3, we can look at your income statement. So your major source of revenue here at the top of page 3 is your metered sales. So we've seen some growth from 2020 to 2022 there, from a little under 900,000 to a little over $1 million. So we saw some growth in your billings in 2022. So it's been this kind of the same story over the last few years. There's been some growth there. Not only are your revenues growing, but your operating disbursements have grown as well. Some of that due to inflation, and some of that due to reallocation of expenses. So at the end of 2022, you had spent $1 million just about out of your operating fund. And then below that there, we've got your non-operating receipts and disbursements. So a little bit of interest income, and then a good chunk of money, about 500 grand from system development and capacity fees. And then capital outlays, that's dollars spent that goes towards that utility plant value that I mentioned earlier. So if we look here at your the third line from the bottom is the increase and decrease in cash investment. So that would essentially be the net income of the water utility, all their funds. So it's coming in at about $200,000 to $300,000 a year. I think if you
Again,
don't have,
that's not being funded by rates. That's primarily being funded by those developer fees.
right. So if those development charges weren't there, then you would have been running a deficit in those years. And then another kind of something I wanted to mention was that transfer from electric utility. It looks like when we did the electric utility rate study, we kind of saw the other side of it, where it looks like $120,000 was transferred in from the electric utility to the water utility. So that might have just been an error on transfers, or I'm not sure if that was a loan that was supposed to be done. So that was just something that we mentioned, but
It may have been a state board of accounts adjustment too. I don't know, but it's outside our test year, and we're not anticipating that going forward.
mhm. So there's our historical financial statements. So that first section there. If we move on to the supplementary information, we look at page 4. We've got your minimum reserves required. So these would be the reserves that are required by that 2015 bond ordinance. So what we see here, your bond and interest fund and your debt service reserve fund. Those are, the bond and interest fund isn't being used because those TIF principal and interest payments are coming out of TIF, and then that debt service reserve fund is fully funded. So that's the requirement that needs to be met there. The operating fund, technically it should be 2 months of operating and maintenance disbursements, but like we mentioned before, that capital improvement fund, there's plenty in there. So in reality, if you include that as well, you've got enough there, and your required reserves for your operating fund. And then those other funds, the depreciation and capital improvement fund, those are for improvements and capital expenditures. And then that construction fund, that would be toward any money that's towards that 2015 project. And then lastly, you've got your meter deposit fund. So that is money that can't be touched. It has to go back to the customers. So that's what we have here on page 4. And then we move on to page 5. This shows the principal and interest remaining on those 2015 bonds. So the last payment on those is January 1, 2031. So at that point, they're for the next 8 years or so, 7 years, it's going to be $385,000. It's coming out of TIF. So after that last payment, that's going to drop off there. If we move on to page 6 of the report, this shows the analysis of your billing data. So we look at your customer classes, residential, commercial, industrial, and government. So that's your municipal there. The average usage is about 4,700 for residents. I'm looking at that gallons billed scheduled in the middle there. So you've billed about 147 million gallons in 2022. You billed dollars, a little over $1 million. So that kind of ties back to what we saw on the income statement with your metered sales. And then at your customer base as a whole, it's about 65% residential, a quarter of that, or a quarter of the total is commercial, and then you've got 9% of industrial, which, you know, there's only 7 industrial customers, but they're using up to 9 or 10% of the flows. And then you've got a handful of government customers as well. There were some adjustments here due to leaks. So looks like in August, we had adjusted the billings, which the adjustments are made on the bills that you send to customers, but the reports that we receive are not adjusted. So we made adjustments so that it looks like what a normal month would be there in August. If we move on to page 7 of the report, this shows your line loss. So we're comparing your gallons pumped by the utility. So that comes in about 239 million gallons, and then comparing that to what is billed. So that's 147 million. So the variance comes up to about 37%. We also included 3 million gallons of hydrant flushing or unbilled water. That was an estimate that we received that was used in 2021. So we used that same estimate in 2022. So the line loss there is about 37%. And that is what we saw in 2021 as well. We looked at the water loss audit report, and it came in right around 36 to 37%. So I know when we mentioned
that's a high number, but you know, you're a relatively small utility, so what's
the norm?
Ideally, you'd like to be between 15 and 20% at the most, but
15 is the threshold that there's,
yeah.
I, in my daytime would be concerned about.
So I think the things to focus on obviously is metering. I know that's something that you're in the process of changing out metering. Another thing that came up was making sure we're not getting ripped off by water haulers that can tap into those hydrants. And I think the police chief had mentioned that they had video of somebody doing that not too long ago. But I mean, that's the type of thing that everybody needs to be vigilant, keep their eyes out, because they shouldn't have, the only people tapping those hydrants should be the fire department or the water department when they do main flushing maintenance. But
Yeah, I think our issue just early.
and then the other thing is just, you know, if the distribution system is old, then there may be leaks out there that valve replacements and so forth, leak detection. Those are the kinds of things that I believe the utility is doing or in the process of getting ready to do. So get a better handle on that number. If you're losing it in metering, you know, that'll pick up revenue. But if it's being lost due to theft or leaks, you know, then, you know, that's another story. Go ahead, Brandon, I'm sorry.
maybe I'll be Jared one day. Yeah, so some of those things that Buzz mentioned, you know, it's something of concern, and those are some ways that can be reduced and try to get it in that 15 to 20% range. That would be what we see as normal, or the threshold, according, you know, to what Jenny has seen in her experience as well. So if we move on to page 8 of the report, this is the schedule of pro forma operating disbursements. So this would be where we are projecting out your operating expenses moving forward. So we've made adjustments to these line items based on feedback that we've received from the town. There's some of that reallocation of expenses there in those first 3 lines, your salaries, employee benefits and taxes. The benefits and taxes, that includes your FICA and Medicare, and then it's got employee, the employee insurance is below that line there. So a lot of your increases, I think increase is not necessarily the right word to use, but it's more reallocation. So, but from a numbers standpoint, that's where you're seeing your increases are mainly in those lines. And then below that, we have other adjustments made for their inflation, or where we're taking some of those amounts and inflating them 3% every year for 3 years. Typically, best practice for a rate study is every 3 to 4 years, you should at least assess your rates. Doesn't necessarily mean that you have to increase your rates every 4 years, but so what we've done in this model is we've included 3 years of inflation on those numbers, so that the pro forma operating amount of it's 1,390,000. That number right there is good for 3 or 4 years, would be where we think that the water utility is heading.
Yeah, and then,
Buzz, I was going to say,
yeah.
Buzz, you want to go ahead on and discuss
the other thing we wanted to look at on your actual rate blocks, where you have a number of declining cost metered rate blocks. We wanted to look and see at what would be a reasonable bottom rate block. What do we want to recover through, even the highest volume users? And primarily, we looked at about 50% of your employee costs as being related to production and distribution. And we took all of your power and chemical costs, and then a fraction of some of the other cost categories to come up with an average, what we'd like to show as sort of the base cost of water, what we want to try to cover in our bottom rate block. We've calculated $4.75 per 1,000 gallons, which would be just about half of what your operation and maintenance costs are. Was the target that was set for establishing a bottom retail rate block. And then when we get to the proposed rate schedule, we'll come back to this number, but I'm going to let Brandon kind of go ahead and go through the revenue requirements that we've inserted here first on the next slide. There you go.
Yep. So this is from page 9 of the rate study. So we're only showing option 1 here in the PowerPoint presentation. What you see in option 2 is the same as option 1, except it includes the $387,000 a year that would be paid. That's being paid currently by the TIF fund. So what if it was being paid by the water utility? Well, you can see in option 2 what the increase would be. Comes in at 76% for option 2, but what the town has in the ordinance and what we presented last to the council was option 1. So if you look at that first line here, we'll set out your revenue requirements. So this is the dollars that need to be recouped by the rates. So $1,390,430. That is operating disbursements that came from the previous page of the report. For option 1 here, we have an improvements allowance and working capital of $300,000 a year. So the rates need to recoup $1,690,430. Next, we have your pro forma revenues. We look at your test year revenues, and we've also made some adjustments that I will go through here. So your $1 million, just about, that's your metered sales from 2022. And then the additional revenues from eliminated rate blocks. So that's what Buzz mentioned when we looked at your base costs analysis. When you drop off that last rate block in the test year, it would bring $22,000 of additional revenues. So we have that included there in option 1. The next line is eliminating private hydrant charges. So the hydrant charges, the private ones, it was $451.44 a year for private charges and public protection. So that would be the money that also came from the general fund. So the
That
private
was, that
hydrant
was sort of
charges,
a decision that was driven by the town. But it sort of offsets the elimination of, it's offset by that, consolidating the bottom rate blocks.
right? So the hydrant charges,
Can we
Does
stop
that-
right there? Can you guys?
yes.
Yeah.
What was the comment you had in town council on this? I was zoomed in and I didn't catch it.
Mhm.
Not eliminate the private.
It's,
So explain to me the logic on that, because if we're technically, or we end up doing it, not doing the maintenance on it, and it's a privately installed hydrant.
But it's not just about the hydrant, it's also that capacity.
Yeah, I know.
And,
But-
and you're paying for the possibility of that use. So why would you not charge for private? I mean, usually they go hand in hand.
Yeah.
So in a way, your other users could be offsetting the cost for them. And you have to think of,
Well,
Peak
I mean, I wish
capacities.
we had always labeled this as fire capacity fee, not.
yeah, if you can change it at
So
some
the
point, I
optics,
would.
the
That's right.
optics don't look right when you
It
charge,
doesn't.
right? So that's why I made the decision to take that out. It was more a political, optical.
Can
whatever you
we
wanna
vote
label
to
it.
change the names to make it true to what?
I don't know
is.
that we need to vote. We just start doing it, right? I mean, we just, from now on, call it whatever.
Well, it would have to be changing your rates and charges. So when that gets approved, just have that as one of the line items to rename it. And that's the part that people don't understand. It's not just paying for the bigger line when it's placed,
Yeah,
but it's then when it's used,
right,
it shoots that peak capacity
right,
way up, and
Yeah.
we have to build out for
Right.
peak,
right.
and that's the real cost.
Designed for the peaks.
Right.
hey, Brandon, can you flip over to the rate schedule page? Because while we're on this topic, somebody with a 2-inch water meter under these new fire capacity charges is gonna pay $50 a month. I'm not sure I know the schools made up several of the private hydrant charge revenues.
Where there's some at Tractor Supply.
But there is sort of an offset by changing the structure of the public fire hydrant capacity fees. Anybody with a 2-inch or greater meter, you got a 6-inch meter, you're gonna pay $455 a month instead of $450 per year. So there are some offsets there. I don't know. We didn't necessarily have the actual number and location of all the private hydrants, but there is gonna be an uptick in revenue. If you jump back to your other page, Brandon, there's about a $25,000 increase in the public hydrant rental charges. And a lot of that would be coming from the oversized, the customers that have bigger meters, which are presumably many of the same customers that were paying the private hydrant rate. So I just want to point that out. I think there's valid points on both sides of the issue of whether to eliminate those private hydrants or not. But that's
The pro, when there's a good time to switch.
To,
to
And
make, probably at year end on that, I would say, would probably be a good time if you, to make that switch, because it's already in your budget for this year. But then next year in 2020, pay 2024, you wouldn't have to budget the hydrant rental in the general fund. You can use that for other things that you need to use it for. And then we'd implement that basically $5 per EDU capacity fee. Fire protection capacity fee could be implemented at that same time. Or I don't know how, if you pay that twice a year when you get your draws, I mean, you could conceivably make that change right away after you pass the ordinance. But it might make sense to do that piece effective January 1st if you want to finish out this year's general fund budget by making those payments. Was that the question?
Do you have any thoughts?
We have to restart the process, obviously.
No. Let's just keep moving forward. Jenny and I talked, we're gonna have to do this again. I think you recommended 3 years, but I think we're gonna be back here sooner than that, because there's some other things we need to
No.
look at anyway, and
We're just meeting revenue requirements
yeah,
here
that's all we're doing really in this ordinance.
with general adjustments.
Revenue requirements minus the bond payment.
Yeah. Yeah, that bond payment's not in there, and that $300,000 of working capital, based on your reaction last time, Jenny, that, you know, in your opinion, that might be a little low. So, you know, it kind of is a bare minimum option one, what we're showing here, but
There are new
Yeah.
developments on the hopper that will help generate marginal, hopefully, you know, some decent margins on new growth, but this is a big step, but it's nowhere close to eliminating all the subsidies, you know. And interestingly enough, eliminating all the subsidies really just gets you back to 3% inflation rate over 19 years since these current rates were put into effect. But
Well, we
again-
realize there's rate shock,
right. I
so
mean, rate shock's the limiting factor here.
right.
we're having good discussion on moving forward with adding different things down the road.
Shall we go to do we need to discuss this slide anymore, or do we want to go to the rate page here? And
And you can move forward.
yeah, I think, you know, that we had mentioned the rate shock. You know, the last point I wanted to make is where, you know, this is only an 84 cents a year increase from 2004 to today. So I think it's in line where you need to be, but unfortunately, when you wait as long as you do, had been, then unfortunately there can be that rate shock where we are seeing a huge jump from $29 to then $39 plus the $5 for the fire protection charge.
but that's not a bad rate for a community your size, even with the $5 fire protection charge. When we
Well,
look
that
at
kind of Buzz,
ahead.
that kind of brings me to the next points that we wanted to make are, we have a few schedules here that show, for one, your current rates versus option one and different usage levels. So that would be an internal rate comparison of where you were to where you'll be. But then also the last slide here will look at your comparisons with other communities as well. So we'll be able to see how that 4,000 gallon rate, which is the benchmark for an average water user, will look how Pendleton compares to
the
other
water usage
communities.
rate for 4,000 gonna go up just a little bit less than $11 a month. And then that $5 fire capacity fee, that's an additional charge that
Mhm.
they haven't seen, but when we do these rate comps, we like to leave that out because not everybody has those and but that 4,000 gallon benchmark is what the state revolving fund uses and USDA rural development uses those and Okra as a benchmark for, you know, a 4,000 gallon water usage charge. But let's jump back to the rate schedule and we'll explain what we want to do is we came up with a target of $4.75 for the bottom rate step, but we're only proposing $4.25. It's basically just applying the 37% increase across the board to all those rate steps and then just consolidating the bottom two rate steps. So instead of that $4.25 charge going for just 30,000 gallons, that would be the rate for, I'm sorry, for that next 50,000 gallons, that would apply to all usage over 30,000 gallons. So you've narrowed your gap. You're still at about 40%. You know, your bottom rate step's about 40% of your top rate step, but you've picked up extra revenue from your high volume users that are probably underpaying right now. So that helped keep the total rate increase less than 40%. You're at 37.6% for the most part. The larger users will get a little bit more of an impact. And then the $5 per EDU municipal hydrant or public fire protection capacity charge. Why don't you go to the comparison with other communities slide? Yeah, this is a good one because it still shows really a pretty good story. And some of these other communities are going through increases just like you're doing right now. But at different points in time, you know, everybody's got to make those step ups. We're looking at option one, which is still less than $40 for the water usage charge, about $45 with the fire capacity fee charge in there. So you're still sort of below the threshold of qualifying for any grant programs, but it's a big step towards, you know, what would ultimately be another $12 a month, or $10 to $12 a month if you fully funded your bond payments from water rates instead of from TIF.
Yeah.
Buzz, what is that, the threshold for the grants?
Well, it used to be $45 a month. It's probably more like $65 a month now. There's just been such big demand. And then sewer utilities, of course, you've got Fall Creek. It used to be 65 and now it's probably 85 or $90 threshold. They just get, there's so much demand out there that and limited dollars. The SRF program gets most of that money. And you're still going to be below that threshold. Now, if we took the option two step, it pushes us up over $51 a month. You know, the other thing they look at, they didn't really used to, but they'll look at MHI and population and things of that nature, which I think your community probably is.
Hamilton's about 5,000, a little under that population.
Yeah. What's the MHI there? Is it? I'm sure
I
it's,
do not know off the top of my head.
I'd have to look, but at any rate, you're probably out of the grant range right now as you get, ramp things up higher down the road. There may be opportunities. But
I think our medium household income is well above the average.
just by looking at the beautiful homes you see when you drive into Pendleton, I would think it's well above that poverty line.
Yeah, well,
So that is in a nutshell where we are. I suppose there's, the council obviously has the final say. We're supposed to meet with them tomorrow, public hearing, and if you're still wrestling with the private hydrant issue,
We're not, Buzz. We're gonna table that for the next time for
Okay.
discussion. We just wanted, I personally wanted to make sure I was frank with where we stand on things. Whether we can't do it all today, can't be the Cadillac plan.
Mhm.
That would hurt our ratepayers. But we have a laundry list of things for the future to consider and to make sure we're doing the right things. And the right thing right now is just getting our revenue requirements little more adjusted to where they need to be. We realize it's not ideal, but we cannot do 76.3 for our
Mhm.
residents.
yeah, I remember my first appearance at the IURC was with the town of Cicero, probably 1981-ish. And they were going in for 112% rate increase. But it was going from like $5 a month to $10 a month.
It's all relative, isn't it?
Percentages can sound really sensational when the real dollars and cents aren't that bad. And I mean, you could make those same arguments here, but the numbers are bigger than $5.
yeah, what was the minimum rate? What would the minimum charge be?
Eight-
3,000.
$8.64 increase plus $5
This is
for the fire
$5
protection.
for the
So
fire.
for a minimum user, which is 25% of your,
So it's
13.
31.59.
1364 would
Mhm.
be the hit for a 3,000-gallon customer. 864 for the usage charge, and then $5 for the shift of the fire protection capacity charge. $22.95 is just giving it away though for 3,000 gallons.
Yeah, I
That's
know.
way too low.
So if you use 5 elderly, your bills, homeowner.
No, I get it, yeah.
Oh, no, gray hair.
I'm under 3,000 gallons every month.
Like if you use no water, you still get.
I just turned 67 the other day, so I'm starting to get more sympathetic with that group too.
you use a lot more water than them though, Buzz.
I think so, yeah. My grandkids are here.
All right, so
I mean, a new option 2 is out. I think it's great from a learning perspective. And that's kind of why it was suggested. I think we need to make sure we remember our laundry list moving forward.
yeah, no, I was just thinking that. If there, so if we moved. So was there any unintended consequences if we did down the road move to start paying off the bond through the rate study? Is there
No.
anything we need to?
No, I think that's your your ultimate revenue pledge is probably coming from the water utility. Or did you also make a pledge of TIF towards that bond? I know you've got the debt reserve funded in your water utility. But,
Okay, well, okay, so that helps me think through it.
no, I mean,
So we'd have to go back and look at the bond and then, so you make the, okay, so you make the point that the reserve is actually being held under the water utility and not under,
I would say it's an
Obviously.
indebtedness of the water utility. It's just being subsidized by TIF.
okay, all right.
So I don't think there's any issue in shifting, gradually or,
So if we did that, all we would do is just transfer the money from the water
to
fund.
the bond and interest sinking fund. I'm
Okay.
not sure, does the TIF pay in the trustee direct? Or that's a
I don't know.
Bank of New York, where those payments go.
I
But theoretically, you would transfer monthly amounts into the bond and interest sinking fund and then make the semi-annual payments from there. I'm assuming this was a SRF deal, is that right? That bond,
I've never heard that, but I wasn't here when it all went down.
let me see here.
Anybody else?
I'm not sure who those 2015 bonds were through.
Yeah.
But what I can tell you though, Scott, is I did look at the bond ordinance on those. And I do recall that those bonds the language says something along the lines of water bonds, revenue water bonds backed by TIF or something along those lines. So to answer your question, there could be an option between option one with an option two on the rate study. There's 76%, there's 37%. There's something that could be in the middle there where, you're gradually working towards paying that off where it's.
I think had we not already hit what I call the rate shock limit,
Yeah. Mhm.
probably would have at least split the difference or somewhere in that ballpark. All right, I think the only thing is if you, Buzz and Brandon, I just need to have a discussion with you on return of plant.
Okay, yeah, we can chat about that. I don't think it's gonna be
Get dirt out on it.
it's not gonna be an issue, I don't think, with your water utility for a while anyway, but it on the electric side is where we run into it more with gas and electric utilities and water and sewer utilities. But anyhow,
It would be a good thing to talk about for the electric rate study then,
yeah,
the return on plant.
yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Do you need anybody else have questions for us tonight, or?
I don't think we do. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate
Thanks.
the service you guys provide, because it's tough to get people to step up to these jobs and dedicate their time to the town business. So thank you.
All right. Have a good night, you guys.
All right, you too, Mike.
Tracy did a good job of getting them information too. They complimented us on that.
Thank you, Tracy.
That we were one of the more cooperative towns. I don't know why you would uncooperate with somebody that you just hired, but
It happens.
anyway.
So kind of moving forward, this will be presented
Tomorrow,
tomorrow.
you need to take a vote, right, Jeff,
We
and
have
then
a
sign.
resolution where you would make a favorable recommendation to the town council to adopt. Have in front of you resolution 2023-01.
Do I have a nomination to vote for resolution 2023-01?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Do we need to do roll call?
Let's hear the vote.
So we have approved.
So they just need to sign.
We
Is
need
it
to
just
sign.
one document?
Yeah, it's one.
All right. Then are you gonna hold that for tomorrow?
Yeah, I'm gonna send it to everybody.